Why do we search for things that might not exist? We have maps of the entire planet. Satellites photograph every square inch of Earth. And yet, we're still haunted by stories. Stories of golden cities in the jungle, of advanced civilizations swallowed by the sea, of phantom islands that appear on old maps and then vanish. These aren't just fairy tales. They are persistent mysteries. Some are based on ancient texts. Others come from the fevered dreams of explorers. But they all have one thing in common. They are lost, and we can't stop looking for them. What if just one of them is real? What would it change about our history? What would it tell us about ourselves? Number 21. Are the Copper Scroll cities a real treasure map? In 1952, an archaeologist was exploring a cave near Qumran. This is the same area where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. In the back of a cave, now called Cave 3, he found something odd. Two rolled up sheets of copper. They were so corroded and brittle they couldn't be unrolled. The team sent them to the Manchester College of Technology in England. Professor H. Wright Baker had a delicate task. He couldn't just unroll the metal. It would crumble into dust. So, he came up with a plan. He carefully cut the scroll into 23 separate strips. Then, he could read what was written on the inside. What he found was not a religious text. It wasn't a history or a prophecy. It was a list. A very specific list. It described 64 locations across the Judean wilderness. And next to each location, it described a treasure. Massive amounts of gold and silver. We're not talking about a few coins. The scroll describes tons of precious metal. One entry mentions 17 silver talents. A single talent is about 75 pounds. The total amount of treasure described is staggering. Estimates suggest over 160 tons of gold and silver. This would be worth billions of dollars today. The language on the scroll is strange. It's a form of Hebrew that's different from the other scrolls. The locations are described with landmarks. In the ruin that is in the Valley of Acre. In the cistern, which is below the rampart. In the water conduit of the northern reservoir. The problem is, these landmarks are either gone or were so common that they're impossible to pinpoint today. It's like a treasure map written for someone who already knew the area intimately. So what is this treasure? The most common theory connects it to the Temple of Jerusalem. In 70 CE, the Romans sacked Jerusalem and destroyed the Second Temple. The story goes that before the Romans arrived, the temple priests hid its vast wealth. They created the Copper Scroll as a master list to find it again someday. If this is true, the scroll is one of the most important historical documents ever found. It's a direct link to the legendary treasure of the temple. But many scholars disagree. John Marco Allegro, one of the original scholars to work on the Dead Sea Scrolls, was a huge believer in the treasure. He led expeditions in the 1960s trying to find it. He found nothing. His obsession with the scroll damaged his career. Other scholars think the treasure is fictional. A piece of folklore, they argue that the amounts are impossibly large. They also point out that copper was an expensive and unusual material to write on. Why use it for a piece of fiction? Some suggest the scroll is a hoax. Or maybe the treasure was real, but it was found centuries ago by someone who didn't tell anyone. The locations are the biggest mystery. Researchers have used ground-penetrating radar and modern archaeological techniques. They've explored countless caves and ruins in the area described. Nothing has ever been found. Not a single coin. This has led to another theory. Perhaps the locations are not literal. Maybe they are symbolic, or maybe the scroll is written in a code we have yet to break. The cistern might not be a cistern. The ruin might be a metaphor for something else. The Copper Scroll sits in the Jordan Museum in Amman. It's a real artifact. You can go see it. It describes real places, and it lists a real treasure. But after more than 70 years of searching, no one has found a single piece of it. The map is real, but is the treasure? What if the treasure was found by the Romans after they tortured a captured priest for the locations? What if the scroll was deliberately created as a fake to send Roman looters on a wild goose chase through the desert? Is it possible that the billions of dollars in gold and silver are still out there, just waiting for someone to finally understand the clues? Well, number 20, can you still hear the bells of Cantref Gwalad? There is a story in Wales, a story of a kingdom now lost to the sea. They say the land of Cantref Gwalod was a rich and fertile place. It lay in what is now Cardigan Bay off the west coast of Wales. This kingdom was protected from the sea by a series of dikes and sluice gates. A prince named Guidno ruled this land. He appointed one of his most trusted friends, a man named Scythanin, to be the watchman of the gates. But Scythanin loved to drink. One night, a terrible storm rolled in. The wind howled and the waves crashed against the dikes. Scythanin was at a party, drunk on wine. He forgot to close the gates. The sea poured in. The entire kingdom, with its 16 towns and beautiful fields, was flooded. The people drowned. The kingdom was lost forever beneath the waves. On a quiet day, some say you can still hear the bells of the kingdom's churches, ringing mournfully from under the water. This is a powerful story. A story of duty, failure, and loss. For centuries, it was just that. A folktale. A Welsh myth similar to the story of Atlantis. But modern science is starting to suggest there might be some truth to it. Researchers have looked at the geology of Cardigan Bay. People like Professor Simon Haslett and David Willis have studied the coastline. Their work suggests that the story could be a folk memory of a real event. Around 6000 BCE, the last ice age was ending. Glaciers were melting, sea levels were rising dramatically. The coastline of Britain looked very different then. Cardigan Bay was much larger, and the land was lower. It's entirely possible that a low-lying area of land was catastrophically flooded. This would not have happened in a single night because of a drunk watchman. It would have happened over generations. But a sudden event like a storm surge or a tsunami could have finished the job. A 2022 study by the University of Bradford examined the area and concluded that 2 islands did exist in the bay at one time. There is also physical evidence. At low tide, you can see submerged tree stumps on the beaches around Cardigan Bay. These ancient forests, like the one at Borth, prove that the sea level was once much lower. People lived here, they hunted here, and then the sea came. Archaeologists have found human footprints preserved in the hardened mud, dating back thousands of years. They also found animal tracks. This was a living landscape. The story of Contra Gwaelod is first written down in the Black Book of Carmarthen, one of the earliest surviving manuscripts in Welsh. It dates to around 1250 CE, but the story itself is likely much older. It was passed down through oral tradition for centuries. It's a classic cautionary tale. But why did it persist for so long? Perhaps because it was based on a real traumatic event that was seared into the collective memory of the people who lived there. The search for Contra Gwaelod isn't about finding golden temples, it's about finding proof of a lost landscape. Marine archaeologists use sonar to map the seabed. They look for unusual formations, straight lines or right angles that might suggest man-made structures. So far, they haven't found a city. But they have found more evidence of a submerged inhabited land. The myth and the science are slowly coming together. The story gives a human face to a geological event. The drunk Scythanin is a way to make sense of a disaster. It's easier to blame one person than to accept the terrifying power of nature. So, was there really a kingdom with 16 towns? Did a man named Guidno Garanhir really rule it? Or is the story a much older memory, a tale from a pre-Celtic people that was adapted over time? Could there be Neolithic or Bronze Age structures on the floor of Cardigan Bay, perfectly preserved in the mud? And if we did find them, would we even recognize them for what they are? Number 19 was the sunken city of Wise destroyed by love or betrayal. Off the coast of Brittany in France, there is another story of a city swallowed by the waves. This is the story of Wise. Wise was said to be the most beautiful city in the world. It was built on land reclaimed from the sea by its wise king, Gradlon. Some legends say it was built below sea level. It was protected by a massive dike. This dike had a single bronze gate, and only King Gradlon had the key. Gradlon had a daughter named Dahut. She was beautiful but wild and rebellious. She loved parties and pleasure. She grew to resent the city's quiet Christian ways. Dahut held wild orgies in the city. She would take lovers, and in the morning, a masked man would kill them. She thought the city was a prison. She wanted it to be free. One day, a handsome knight in red armor arrived in Wise. Dahut fell deeply in love with him. He was charming and seductive. He told her everything she wanted to hear. He encouraged her rebellion against her father. He told her that her father's key was a symbol of her oppression. One stormy night, she stole the key from around her sleeping father's neck. She gave it to the knight. He was not a knight at all. He was the devil. He opened the gate. The sea rushed in. The city was doomed. King Gradlin was woken by a holy man, Saint Gwynol. They fled on a magical horse. Dahut tried to climb on behind her father, but the horse struggled. The saint told the king he had to cast off the demon at his back. Gradlin, heartbroken, pushed his daughter into the raging water. As soon as she fell, the waters calmed. The king escaped, but the city of Wise was gone forever. They say Dahut was transformed into a mermaid, a Morgan, who lures sailors to their deaths. The legend of Wise is a cornerstone of Breton culture. It's a story about the clash between paganism, represented by Dahut, and Christianity, represented by Saint Gwenol. It's a story about sin and punishment. But like Cantreg Walad, there may be a grain of historical truth to it. The story could be a memory of coastal subsidence or a tsunami that destroyed a coastal settlement. The area around the Baie de Douarnenez, where YS is said to be located, has a history of such events. Archaeological finds in the region hint at a prosperous Gallo-Roman past. Roman bricks and parts of buildings have been found on the seabed. This suggests that there was once a significant settlement here that is now underwater. Was this Wise, or was it just a Roman port town that fell victim to a rising sea? The story of YS was not written down in its complete form until the 19th century, but elements of it are much older. The figure of King Grelon appears in earlier texts. He was likely a real historical ruler in the 5th or 6th century. The story was probably built around him over time. Each generation added a new layer. The Christian elements were likely added later to turn a local flood myth into a moral lesson. The search for YS continues in a way, not with diving crews looking for a bronze gate, but with historians and folklorists who trace the story's origins. They look for the kernel of truth inside the myth. The story tells us a lot about the people of Brittany. Their relationship with the sea, their transition from paganism to Christianity, their cultural identity. The YS is more than a lost city. It's a lost world, a world of magic, kings, and saints that exists just off the coast, just under the waves. Was there ever a real Dahut, a rebellious princess whose actions led to a disaster? Is the story a symbolic retelling of a political or religious conflict that tore a community apart? Or could the remains of a real pre-Christian city still be sitting on the seabed, its story completely misinterpreted by later generations? Number 18, did a single wave erase Lyonesse from the map? Travel to the very tip of Cornwall in England, look out from Land's End towards the Isles of Scilly, about 28 miles away. According to legend, you are looking at the spot where the kingdom of Lyonesse once stood. It was a beautiful land with fair towns and over 140 churches. It was the home of heroes from Arthurian legend. Tristan of Tristan and Isolde fame was said to be from Lyonesse. The story goes that the entire kingdom was swallowed by the sea in a single night. A huge wave swept over the land and everything was lost. Only one man survived. His name was Trevelyan. He was out hunting and saw the wave coming. He rode his horse to higher ground, reaching the area now known as Perranuthno. His escape is the origin of the Trevelyan family crest, which shows a horse rising from the waves. This story is deeply embedded in Cornish folklore. Fishermen have long told tales of pulling up bits of old buildings or window frames in their nets. They talk of seeing the tops of spires just beneath the surface of the water on a calm day. It's a powerful image, a lost land, a British Atlantis lying just offshore. The legend is most famously recorded in later works, including Alfred, Lord Tennyson's Idylls of the King. But the idea of a lost land between Cornwall and the Scilly Isles is much older. The Roman writer William of Worcester in the 15th century mentioned submerged woods and fields in the area. Early maps show the Isles of Scilly as a single large island, not the collection of smaller islands we see today. Like the other sunken city myths, there is scientific evidence to support the core idea. The area between Land's End and the Isles of Scilly is a shallow shelf. After the last ice age, as the sea levels rose, this area would have been dry land. It was a low-lying plain, likely inhabited. The flooding would have happened gradually over thousands of years. But a major storm or tsunami could have caused a sudden catastrophic inundation, wiping out the last remnants of this land and its people. This event could have become the basis for the legend of Lyonesse. In 2009, archaeologists from the Cornwall Archaeological Unit discovered the remains of a prehistoric field system submerged in the water around the Isles of Scilly. This was concrete proof that people were living and farming on land that is now deep underwater. They found stone walls and evidence of settlements dating back to the Bronze Age. This wasn't the kingdom of Arthurian legend, with its knights and churches. It was an older, simpler world, but it was a real inhabited land that was lost to the sea. The story of Lyonesse is probably a composite. It's a combination of the geological reality of a submerged landscape and the romantic tales of Arthurian legend. The storytellers took the real memory of a drowned land and populated it with the heroes of their own time. It made the story more epic, more tragic. The search for Lyonesse has become less about, finding a specific kingdom and more about understanding this lost prehistoric landscape. What was life like on the plains between Cornwall and Scilly? How did the people adapt to the rising sea? And what happened in the end? Were they able to retreat, or were they caught by a final devastating flood? Could a large, advanced Iron Age settlement, the kind that might be remembered as a kingdom, still be undiscovered out there? Is it possible that the stories of hauling up building materials and fishing nets are true, pointing to a specific site no one has properly investigated? And what would finding such a place do to the Arthurian legends we thought we knew? Number 17 was the City of the Caesars, a refuge for survivors. In the vast windswept wilderness of Patagonia, in the southern reaches of South America, there is a legend of a different kind of lost city. Not a city of gold, but a city of survivors. This is the Wandering City, the City of the Caesars. The story changes depending on who is telling it. Sometimes it's a city founded by shipwrecked Spanish sailors. Other times it was founded by Incas fleeing the Spanish conquest. Sometimes it's a mystical place that appears and disappears. But the core of the story is always the same: a prosperous, hidden city of white people deep in the unexplored mountains and plains of Patagonia. The legend began in the 16th century. One of the earliest accounts comes from the expedition of Sebastian Cabot in 1528. A handful of his men, led by Captain Francisco Cesar, went on an expedition inland from the Rio de la Plata. They were gone for months. When they returned, they told stories of a rich city in the mountains, full of silver and gold, ruled by a wise people. This is likely the origin of the name, the City of the Caesars. Over the next 200 years, the legend grew. It merged with other stories. In 1540, a ship from the Bishop of Plasencia's expedition was wrecked in the Strait of Magellan. The survivors supposedly made their way inland and founded a city. This story gave the legend a specific origin point. Later, the legend absorbed stories of the Incas. It was said that a group of Incas escaped the Spanish with their treasure and founded a secret city in the south, far from their homeland. This made the City of the Caesars a hybrid myth. It was a city of rich Incas, but also a city of white, bearded men. This strange combination only made the story more appealing. Dozens of expeditions were launched to find it. The Jesuit missionaries, Spanish governors, and private adventurers all searched for the city. They scoured the vast, empty landscapes of Patagonia. They followed rumors and interrogated local indigenous people. They found nothing. The search for the city was dangerous. The landscape is brutal. Many expeditions ended in disaster. Men starved, froze, or were killed in conflicts with native tribes. Yet the legend persisted. It was a beacon of hope in a harsh land. It was the promise of wealth and a safe haven. The descriptions of the city were detailed. It was said to be located on the shores of a large lake. Its inhabitants were immortal, or at least lived for a very long time. They had gold, silver, and diamonds. They lived in peace and prosperity. By the late 18th century, the Spanish authorities started to doubt the city's existence. The repeated failures of expeditions made it clear that there was no great city to be found. But the legend never completely died. It just retreated from the maps into folklore. It became a ghost story, a wandering city that you could only find by accident, and never again. What is the truth behind the City of the Caesars? It was likely a combination of things. A mirage born of desperation. The early Spanish explorers were suffering. They were far from home. The story of a rich city gave them hope. It was also likely based on misunderstood stories from indigenous people. The Spanish would ask about cities of gold. The local tribes might tell them stories, either real or imagined, to get them to move on. There were also real, isolated indigenous groups in Patagonia. An encounter with one of these groups could have been exaggerated into the discovery of a lost city. The search for the City of the Caesars wasn't just about gold. It was about finding a European-style utopia in the middle of a wild and alien continent. It was about the desire for a new beginning. Could a small, isolated group of Spanish shipwreck survivors have actually lasted for a few generations, creating a settlement that gave rise to the myth? Is it possible that the early explorers stumbled upon an unusually prosperous and well-organized indigenous settlement that they mistook for a European-style city? Or was the entire story just a rumor that spiraled out of control, fueled by greed and wishful thinking for over 2 centuries? Number 16, where are the ruins of Akkad? We can visit the ruins of Babylon. We can walk through the remains of Ur. These were the great cities of ancient Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. But there is one great city that is missing, the capital of the world's first empire, Akkad. Around 2334 BCE, a man named Sargon came to power. We don't know much about his origins. The legends say he was a humble gardener who rose to become a king, but what he did is clear. He conquered the Sumerian city-states of Mesopotamia one by one. He united them into a single state. This was the Akkadian Empire. It was a new kind of political entity, the world's first empire. And its capital city was Akkad. For about 150 years, Akkad was the center of this vast empire. It stretched from the Mediterranean Sea to the Persian Gulf. Akkad must have been a magnificent city, a center of power, trade, and culture. The Akkadian language replaced Sumerian as the main language of the region. Akkadian art reached new heights of realism and dynamism. We have thousands of cuneiform tablets from this period. They talk about the kings of Akkad. They describe the empire's administration. They mention the city of Akkad hundreds of times, and then it vanished. The Akkadian Empire collapsed around 2154 BCE. A combination of internal rebellion, invasion from the Gutian people, and possibly a severe climate change event brought it down. The empire fell apart, and the city of Akkad disappeared from history. We don't know exactly what happened to it. Later texts suggest it was destroyed by the Gutians. The Curse of Akkad, an ancient Mesopotamian poem, says the city was cursed by the gods because one of its kings, Naram-Sin, sacked a holy temple. The poem says the city was so thoroughly destroyed that the canal boat towpaths grew nothing but weeds. Its chariot roads grew nothing but the wailing plant. The problem is, we don't know where Akkad is. We have never found its ruins. This is a major puzzle in archaeology. We know it existed. We have endless textual references to it. We know it was one of the most important cities of its time, but its location is a complete mystery. Scholars have been searching for Akkad for over a century. They have theories, of course. Based on the cuneiform texts, they have a general idea of where it should be. It was likely located on the banks of the Euphrates River, somewhere between the cities of Sippar and Kish in modern-day Iraq. It's a huge area. It has been intensively farmed and built over for thousands of years. The landscape has changed. The course of the Euphrates has shifted. Archaeologists have excavated numerous mounds, or tells, in this region. A tell is a hill formed by the accumulated remains of ancient settlements. They hope to find one that contains the ruins of Akkad. But so far, nothing. Some have suggested that the ruins of Akkad lie beneath a modern city like Baghdad, making them impossible to excavate. Others believe the city was so completely destroyed and its bricks so thoroughly scavenged for other buildings that there is simply nothing left to find. Modern techniques offer some hope. Satellite imagery can sometimes reveal patterns in the soil that suggest buried structures. But the political instability in Iraq has made large-scale archaeological work difficult and dangerous for many years. The search for Akkad is on hold. Finding Akkad would be like finding the historical King Arthur's Camelot. It would be a monumental discovery. It would give us a new understanding of the world's first empire. We could see how the city was laid out. We could learn about the daily lives of its people. We could uncover its royal palaces and temples. Until then, the capital of Sargon the Great remains a ghost. A name in a text. Could the curse of Akkad be a folk memory of a real catastrophic event, like a sudden shift in the river's course that left the city without water? Is it possible that the ruins are in plain sight, but we have misidentified them as another, lesser city? Or was Akkad so systematically erased by its enemies that not a single brick is left to tell its story? Number 15, did an angry god sink the city of Philae? In the winter of 373 BCE, something terrifying happened on the coast of Greece. The ancient city of Philae, a prosperous and important center of the Achaean League, was destroyed in a single night. The story, told by ancient writers like Pausanias and Strabo, is dramatic. First, there were strange signs. Snakes, mice, and other animals fled the city in a mass exodus. Then, a massive earthquake struck. The city sank into the ground. A huge tsunami swept in from the Gulf of Corinth and covered what was left. The city of Helike and all its inhabitants were gone, wiped from the face of the earth. For the ancient Greeks, the reason for this disaster was clear. It was divine retribution. Helike was a major center for the worship of Poseidon, the god of the sea and earthquakes. The city was known as Helike Poseidon, but the people of Helike had become arrogant. The story goes that they refused a request from a group of Ionian colonists who wanted to take a copy of their famous statue of Poseidon. They even sent envoys from Asia who were mistreated. This angered the god, and he took his revenge. He used his powers to utterly destroy the city that was supposed to honor him. The story of Helike became a cautionary tale in the ancient world, a story about the dangers of hubris. The Roman writer Aelian said that for centuries after the disaster, you could still see the submerged ruins of the city from a boat. He claimed you could even see the giant bronze statue of Poseidon still standing upright in the murky depths, a danger to fishermen's nets. For over 2,000 years, that's all Helike was. A story, a legend. No one knew exactly where it was. People assumed it was lost forever at the bottom of the Gulf of Corinth. Many tried to find it. In the 19th century, German archaeologists looked for it. In the 20th century, even the famous oceanographer Jacques Cousteau searched for it in the waters of the Gulf. They all found nothing. It seemed the sea was keeping its secrets. Then, in the late 1980s, two archaeologists, Dora Katsanopoulou and Steven Soter, came up with a new idea. They reread the ancient text carefully. The text said Helike was located some distance from the sea. They realized that everyone had been looking in the wrong place. They weren't looking for a city in the deep sea. They were looking for a city that was buried inland. What could have happened? They theorized that the earthquake caused a phenomenon called soil liquefaction, or the ground, which was soft and water saturated, essentially turned to liquid during the shaking. The city sank into the mud. Then the tsunami came and buried it under a thick layer of silt. Over the centuries, the coastline changed. The river deltas pushed further out into the sea. The spot where Helike was buried was now dry land, several kilometers from the coast. So they started searching inland. They used drills to take core samples of the soil. They were looking for a destruction layer, a layer of pottery shards, broken bricks, and other human debris buried deep in the mud. In 2001, they found it. They found the ruins of a classical Greek city buried under meters of ancient lagoon clay. They had found Helike. The excavation is ongoing. It is a slow and difficult process. But they have uncovered buildings, city walls, coins, and pottery. It is all from the right time period. They have found a city that was destroyed in a violent event. It seems the ancient story was true. Not the part about the angry god, perhaps, but the part about the earthquake, the sinking, and the tsunami. Helike is sometimes called the real Atlantis. The story of its sudden destruction by an earthquake and a flood is very similar to the story Plato told about Atlantis. In fact, Plato wrote about Atlantis only a few years after Helike was destroyed. You know, some scholars believe that the destruction of Helike was the direct inspiration for Plato's story. He took a real contemporary event and used it as the basis for his philosophical allegory. What other legends might be based on real catastrophic events that we've misinterpreted? If a city as important as Helike could be completely lost and forgotten for over 2 millennia, how many other cities are still buried under the mud? And what secrets does the rest of the buried city hold about life and death in classical Greece? Number 14 was Mu, a real continent in the Pacific. In the 19th century, as archaeology and occultism started to mix, a new set of lost worlds emerged. These were not just cities, but entire continents. The most famous, after Atlantis, is the lost continent of Mu. The story of Mu begins with a man named Augustus Le Plongeon. He was a 19th century photographer and amateur archaeologist who studied the Maya ruins in the Yucatan. Le Plongeon was not a mainstream scholar. He had his own unique ideas. While trying to translate a Mayan text called the Toronto Codex, he came to believe he had found the story of a lost continent. He claimed the text described a powerful civilization that was destroyed by a volcanic catastrophe. He called this continent Mu. He also claimed that the survivors of Mu had gone on to found the ancient Egyptian and Mayan civilizations. Le Plongeon's ideas were not taken seriously by the academic community. His translations were questionable, and his theories were wild. But the idea of a lost continent in the Pacific was compelling. It was picked up and popularized by a man named James Churchward. Churchward was a British occult writer. In the 1920s and 30s, he published a series of books, starting with The Lost Continent of Mu, Motherland of Man. Churchward claimed that while serving as a soldier in India, he befriended a high-ranking temple priest. This priest showed him a set of ancient, hidden tablets written in a forgotten language. Churchward, of course, was able to learn this language. The tablets, which he called the Nakal tablets, told the complete story of Mu. According to Churchward, Mu was a huge continent in the Pacific Ocean. It was a tropical paradise. It was home to a highly advanced civilization of 64 million people, the Nakals. They lived in peace and prosperity under a single government and a single religion, worshipping the sun. This was the original Garden of Eden, the motherland of all humanity. About 12,000 years ago, according to Churchward, this paradise was destroyed. Gas chambers deep below the continent collapsed. The entire landmass sank beneath the waves in a fiery cataclysm. The only remnants of this great continent are the tiny islands we see in the Pacific today, like Easter Island and Hawaii. The statues on Easter Island, the pyramids of Egypt, the temples of the Maya, all were the work of colonists from the great motherland of Mu. Churchward's books were incredibly popular. They came at a time when people were fascinated with ancient mysteries and spiritualism. His story was exciting and romantic, but there was no evidence for any of it. He never produced the Nakal tablets. His story of the Indian priest was convenient and unverifiable. And most importantly, the geology was completely wrong. Modern geology and the theory of plate tectonics have shown that a large continent cannot simply sink beneath the ocean. The ocean floor is made of denser basaltic rock, while continents are made of lighter granitic rock. Continents don't sink, they drift. There is no evidence of a sunken continent in the Pacific. The Pacific Ocean Basin is a very old and stable feature of the Earth's geology. The islands of Polynesia are volcanic peaks, not the mountaintops of a sunken landmass. The idea of Mu is a fantasy, a 19th century invention. It's a product of colonial-era thinking, the idea that all great civilizations must have come from a single, superior source. It lumps together the achievements of many different unrelated cultures and attributes them to a single mythical race. But the story persists. It's still popular in New Age circles and esoteric literature. It speaks to a deep human desire for a lost golden age, a time of peace and enlightenment, a paradise lost. The story of Mu is not a story about a real place. It's a story about what we wish our past had been. Why do we so readily accept stories of a single mother culture, instead of celebrating the unique achievements of diverse civilizations? What is it about the idea of a lost paradise that remains so powerful, even in the face of all scientific evidence to the contrary? Could the legend of Mu be a distorted memory, not of a continent, but of a vast network of seafaring cultures that was disrupted by rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age? Number 13. Could Lemuria have been home to a lost human ancestor? Before there was Mu, there was Lemuria. The story of this lost continent is different. It didn't start with an occultist or an amateur archaeologist, it started with a scientist. In the 1860s, before the theory of plate tectonics was understood, scientists were trying to explain a strange biological puzzle. They found fossils of lemurs, a type of primate, in both Madagascar and India. But they couldn't find them in Africa or the Middle East. This was a problem. How could these animals have gotten from one place to the other? A British zoologist named Philip Sclater came up with a hypothesis. In a paper called The Mammals of Madagascar, published in 1864, he proposed that there was once a large landmass in the Indian Ocean, a land bridge connecting southern Africa, Madagascar, and India. This would explain how the lemurs and other species could have spread across the region. He called this hypothetical landmass Lemuria. This was a serious scientific idea at the time. Other prominent scientists, like the German naturalist Ernst Haeckel, supported it. And Haeckel even suggested that Lemuria might have been the ancestral home of humanity, the cradle of the human race. This was a powerful idea, a lost continent in the Indian Ocean, the birthplace of our species. The idea of Lemuria as a scientific hypothesis didn't last long. By the early 20th century, the discovery of continental drift and plate tectonics provided a much better explanation for the distribution of species. The continents themselves had moved. There was no need for a sunken land bridge. Lemuria was abandoned by science, but the name and the idea were too good to let go. It was picked up by the occult and theosophical movements. Just like with Atlantis and Mu, Helena Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy, incorporated Lemuria into her complex mystical cosmology. In her book, The Secret Doctrine, 1888, she described the Lemurians as one of the root races of humanity. They were a bizarre, giant, ape-like race of hermaphrodites with a third eye that gave them psychic powers. They lived millions of years ago and coexisted with dinosaurs. Their continent was eventually destroyed. This version of Lemuria, the mystical, spiritual version, is the one that has survived. It became a staple of esoteric literature. It was often confused or merged with the story of Mu. Writers like James Churchward simply moved Lemuria into the Pacific and equated it with his own lost continent. But there is a strange echo of the original scientific idea in modern discoveries. In 2013, geologists studying the island of Mauritius found something interesting. They found crystals of zircon in the beach sand that were much older than the island itself. Mauritius is a relatively young volcanic island, but these zircons were billions of years old. They must have come from a much older piece of continental crust. This led to the theory of a microcontinent called Mauritia, a small piece of an ancient supercontinent that broke off and is now submerged beneath the Indian Ocean. Mauritius and other nearby islands are the volcanic tips that sit on top of this sunken fragment. This is not Lemuria, the vast continent stretching from Africa to India, but it is a real piece of lost continental crust under the Indian Ocean. It's a fascinating example of science finding a kernel of truth in an old, discarded idea. Was the original scientific theory of Lemuria completely wrong? Or was it just a flawed interpretation of a real geological feature like Mauritia? Could ancient myths from India about sunken lands, like the story of Kumari Kandam in Tamil literature, be a folk memory of the gradual submergence of this microcontinent? And is it possible that this lost landmass held fossils or other evidence of early human migration that are now lost to us forever? Number 12. Is Shambhala a real place or a state of mind? In the remote, inaccessible valleys of the Himalayas, there is said to be a hidden kingdom. It is a place of peace and enlightenment. Its people are wise and compassionate. They possess advanced spiritual knowledge and technology. They guard the highest wisdom of humanity. This is the kingdom of Shambhala. The idea of Shambhala comes from ancient Tibetan Buddhist and Hindu texts. One of the most important is the Kalachakra Tantra. These texts describe Shambhala as a real physical place. A kingdom hidden behind a ring of snow-capped mountains. Its capital is a city called Kalapa. At its center is a magnificent palace. The kings of Shambhala are enlightened rulers who uphold the true Buddhist teachings. The texts contain a prophecy. It says that as the world descends into an age of war, greed, and chaos, the 25th king of Shambhala, Rudrachakran, will emerge with a great army. He will defeat the forces of darkness and establish a new golden age of peace and harmony. For centuries, Shambhala was seen by many Buddhists as a real physical destination, a place you could reach if you had the right spiritual merit and could survive the journey. It was a kind of Buddhist El Dorado. But instead of gold, the treasure was enlightenment. Many lamas and pilgrims have tried to find it over the centuries. They left on journeys into the Himalayas and were never seen again. In the West, the story of Shambhala became popular in the 19th and 20th centuries. The Theosophical Society and other esoteric groups adopted it. They saw Shambhala as the home of the Great White Brotherhood, a group of ascended masters who secretly guide the spiritual evolution of humanity. This version of the story fired the Western imagination. The idea of a hidden spiritual kingdom in the East also attracted some strange followers. In the 1930s, the Nazis became obsessed with ancient myths and symbols. Heinrich Himmler's Ahnenerbe, a pseudo-scientific branch of the SS, sent an expedition to Tibet in 1938. One of their goals was to find evidence of an ancient Aryan race and to make contact with the hidden masters of Shambhala, whom they saw as the guardians of a lost Aryan power. But what is Shambhala really? Is it a place you can find on a map? Most modern Tibetan lamas, including the Dalai Lama, teach that Shambhala is not primarily a physical place. It is an inner state, a symbol of the enlightened mind. The journey to Shambhala is not a physical journey. It is an internal spiritual journey. To find Shambhala is to find the peace and wisdom within yourself. At the same time, they don't completely rule out its physical existence. They suggest it might exist on a different plane of reality, a pure land that can only be perceived by those with a purified mind. It's both real and not real at the same time. It's hidden not by mountains, but by our own spiritual ignorance. The search for Shambhala has also been interpreted in a more geographical way. Some scholars have tried to identify a real historical kingdom that might have been the basis for the myth. They have suggested various locations in Central Asia, like the Tarim Basin or the Altai Mountains. The legend could be a glorified memory of a real kingdom where Buddhism once flourished. Nicholas Roerich, a Russian artist and mystic, was obsessed with finding Shambhala. He led a 5-year expedition across Central Asia in the 1920s. He didn't find the kingdom, but his paintings and writings did a lot to popularize the idea in the West. He believed it was a real place, a force for global peace. The story of Shambhala is a powerful one. It's the promise of a safe haven in a troubled world. It's the idea that somewhere a flame of wisdom is being kept alive, ready to be shared when we need it most. Whether it's a real place, a state of mind, or a future prophecy, its power lies in the hope it represents. Was Shambhala once a real kingdom whose location was lost, but its memory preserved in myth? Is the prophecy of the coming king of Shambhala a metaphor for a global spiritual awakening? Or could a small isolated community high in the mountains have maintained a unique culture for centuries, giving rise to the legend of a hidden enlightened kingdom? Number 11 was Thule, the edge of the known world. To the ancient Greeks and Romans, the world was centered on the Mediterranean. As they explored further north, they reached the cold, foggy shores of Britain. But what lay beyond that? What was in the great northern ocean? In the 4th century BCE, a Greek explorer named Pytheas of Massalia went on an incredible journey. He was a navigator and geographer from what is now Marseille, France. He sailed north past Britain, and he claimed he reached an island called Thule. He described it in his now lost book, On the Ocean. He said it was 6 days' sail north of Britain. It was a land where the sun barely set in the summer, a place where the sea, land, and air all seemed to merge into a single slushy substance like a sea lung. For the ancient world, Thule became a byword for the furthest possible point north, the edge of the known world, Ultima Thule. But where was it? Pytheas's work is lost. We only have quotes and summaries from later writers like Strabo and Pliny the Elder, and they didn't always believe him. Strabo called Pytheas a liar. The idea of a land of the midnight sun seemed absurd. The scholars have been debating the location of Thule for centuries. Was it Norway? The Shetland Islands? The Faroe Islands? Iceland? Or was it just a story Pytheas made up? The clues are tantalizing but vague. The description of the midnight sun points to a location north of the Arctic Circle. This would make Norway or Iceland a good candidate. Iceland seems particularly likely. It's an island, and it's about the right distance from Britain. Pytheas' strange description of a sea lung could have been his attempt to describe the slushy sea ice that forms in the Arctic. If Pytheas did reach Iceland in the 4th century BCE, it would be an incredible achievement. Wow. It would mean he was the first person from the Mediterranean world to visit it, over 1,000 years before the Vikings. He would have been a navigator of extraordinary skill, but the mystery of Thule doesn't end there. Like so many other lost places, it was co-opted by later groups for their own purposes. In the early 20th century in Germany, a mystical anti-Semitic secret society was formed. They called themselves the Thule Society. They believed in a wild theory about a lost Aryan homeland. For them, Thule was not just an island. It was a lost land in the north, the home of a giant superhuman race, a kind of Aryan Atlantis. They believed the survivors of this lost land were the ancestors of the Aryan race. The Thule Society was influential in the early days of the Nazi Party. Hitler was associated with some of its members. They twisted a geographical mystery into a hateful racist ideology. This has cast a dark shadow over the story of Thule. But the original mystery remains: what did Pytheas see? Was he a brilliant explorer who was disbelieved by his more provincial contemporaries? Or was he a clever storyteller who spun a tale about a phantom island? The search for Thule is a historical detective story. It's about piecing together fragments of ancient texts and trying to match them with the realities of geography and navigation. It's a reminder that the world was once a much bigger and more mysterious place, and that a single journey could change the map forever. Could Pythias have been describing Greenland, or did he simply hear about it from northern traders and pretend he went there himself? Is it possible that Thule wasn't one specific place, but a name he gave to the whole concept of the far north, a land of ice and endless daylight? And how much of our ancient history is lost because the reports of daring explorers were dismissed as lies by the scholars of their time? Number 10 were the 7 cities of Cibola, a glimmer of gold. In 1536, 4 survivors of a disastrous Spanish expedition emerged from the wilderness of North America. They had been wandering for 8 years, living among native tribes. One of them was a man named Alvar Nunez Cabeza de Vaca. He told his story to the Spanish authorities in Mexico City. He described the harsh realities of the land, but he also repeated rumors he had heard. Rumors of large, wealthy cities to the north. Cities with multi-story buildings and endless riches. This was exactly what the Spanish conquistadors wanted to hear. They had conquered the Aztecs and the Incas. They had found immense wealth. They were hungry for more. These rumors sparked a new wave of exploration. They became focused on one specific legend. The legend of the 7 cities of Cibola. The legend itself was older. It was a Portuguese story from the Middle Ages. It told of 7 bishops who fled the Muslim invasion of the Iberian Peninsula in the 8th century. They sailed west across the Atlantic and founded 7 cities in a new land. This old story was now transplanted to the American Southwest. The rumors of wealthy native cities became merged with the legend of the 7 Christian cities. In 1539, a Franciscan friar named Marcos de Niza was sent north to investigate. He took with him one of the survivors from Cabeza de Vaca's group, a man named Estebanico. Estebanico went ahead of the main party. He sent back reports of a great city. But then he was killed by the local Zuni people at a village called Hawiku. Friar Marcos claimed he continued on and saw the city from a distance. He said it was larger than Mexico City. He described it as a glittering city. He rushed back to Mexico City with the news. Cibola was real, and it was rich. This report caused a sensation. A massive expedition was organized. It was led by Francisco Vázquez de Coronado. In 1540, with a huge force of Spanish soldiers and native allies, Coronado marched north into what is now Arizona and New Mexico. He was expecting to find a city of gold. What he found was Hawiku, a Montezuma pueblo, a village of mud and stone. It had multi-story buildings, yes, but it was not a vast city. And there was no gold. The glitter that Friar Marcos had seen was probably the sun reflecting off the mica and the adobe walls. The Spanish were furious. They felt they had been tricked. They conquered the Zuni pueblo, but their dreams of another Inca empire were shattered. Coronado didn't give up. He spent the next 2 years searching the Great Plains for other mythical cities like Quivira. He was led on a wild goose chase by a native guide. He found nothing but small villages and vast herds of buffalo. The expedition was a failure. It found no gold. It bankrupted Coronado. The 7 cities of Cibola never existed. They were a myth, a projection of Spanish greed and wishful thinking onto the landscape of the American Southwest. The Zuni pueblos were real. The people who lived there had a rich and complex culture. But they were not the golden cities of legend. The story of Cibola is a story about the danger of seeing what you want to see. Friar Marcos may not have been deliberately lying. He may have seen the pueblo from a distance at sunset and, caught up in the excitement and the legend, believed he was seeing a city of gold. The Spanish heard rumors of large villages and, in their minds, transformed them into great cities. The search for Cibola had a devastating impact on the native peoples of the region. The Coronado expedition brought violence, disease, and disruption. The dream of gold led to a nightmare of conquest. What was Friar Marcos de Niza really thinking when he made his report? Was he a liar, a fool, or just a man who got carried away by a story? How much of the history of exploration is driven not by facts, but by powerful, motivating myths? And if the Spanish had found modest amounts of silver or turquoise instead of nothing, would the Zuni culture have been completely destroyed in the ensuing rush? Number 9, is Aztlan a real place or a political idea? For the Aztec people, their origin story was central to their identity. They did not come from the Valley of Mexico, where they built their great capital, Tenochtitlan. They came from a homeland to the north, a mythical island paradise called Aztlan, the place of the white heron, According to Aztec codices like the Boturini Codex, the Aztec people, then known as the Mexica, lived in Aztlan in peace. But their patron god, Huitzilopochtli, spoke to them. He told them to leave Aztlan and search for a new home. He promised them a sign they would find an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a serpent. This is where they should build their new city. So they began a long migration, a journey that lasted for generations. They wandered through the deserts of what is now northern Mexico and the American Southwest. Finally, around 1325 CE, they arrived in the Valley of Mexico. On an island in Lake Texcoco, they saw the sign. The eagle, the cactus, the serpent. This is where they founded Tenochtitlan, the city that would become the center of the mighty Aztec Empire. Today, that symbol is on the flag of Mexico. But where was Aztlan? The Aztec texts are vague about its location. They just say it was to the north. This has led to centuries of speculation. Is Aztlan a real historical place, or is it a purely mythological creation, a Garden of Eden for the Aztec people? Scholars and enthusiasts have proposed dozens of locations. Some look for a literal island. A candidate is the island of Mixcaltitan off the coast of the state of Nayarit in Mexico. Its layout has some similarities to ancient depictions of Aztlan. Others believe Aztlan was in the American Southwest. They point to the large, complex Pueblo cultures that existed there, like the ones at Chaco Canyon. The Aztecs could have been a group that migrated south from this region. Some have even suggested locations as far north as Utah or Colorado. The problem is, there is no archaeological evidence to definitively link any of these sites to the Aztecs. We can't trace their migration route backward. The story is a legend, not a historical map. Many historians now believe that Aztlan was not a real place. It was a symbolic one. A way for the Aztecs to create a noble and distinct origin for themselves. When the Aztecs arrived in the Valley of Mexico, they were a small, marginal tribe. The valley was already dominated by powerful city-states. By creating the story of Aztlan and their long migration, they were building a national identity. They were positioning themselves as a chosen people destined for greatness. The story also had a political purpose. The Aztec Emperor Itzcoatl, who ruled in the early 15th century, is said to have ordered the burning of earlier historical records. He wanted to create a new official history, a history that glorified the Aztecs and their god Huitzilopochtli. The story of Aztlan was a key part of this new history. In modern times, the idea of Aztlan has been reclaimed. In the 1960s, Chicano activists in the American Southwest adopted the name Aztlan to refer to the lands that Mexico lost to the United States in the Mexican-American War. For them, Aztlan is a symbolic homeland, a symbol of their cultural and historical roots in the region. It's a powerful political and cultural idea. The search for Aztlan is not just an archaeological quest. It's a search for the origins of a people and the meaning of a nation. It's a place that may exist only in a story. But that makes it no less real to the people who claim it as their heritage. Was Aztlan a real place, perhaps a small settlement, whose memory was mythologized and exaggerated over time? If the story was a political invention, where did the specific imagery of the island and the seven caves come from? And does it matter if Aztlan was a real place, or is its power as a cultural symbol more important than any physical location? Number 8, what happened to the lost city of the Kalahari? In the vast, dry expanse of the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa, there is a persistent story of a lost city. It's not a city of gold, it's a city of stone, the ruins of a great civilization that rose and fell in the middle of the desert. The modern story begins in 1885 with a Canadian entertainer and adventurer named William Leonard Hunt, who went by the stage name the Great Farini. He claimed to have crossed the Kalahari Desert. On his return, he wrote a book and gave lectures to the Royal Geographical Society in London. He described many things he saw, but one claim stood out. He said he had found the ruins of a massive ancient city half buried in the sand. Farini described a huge wall, paved areas, and a series of structures laid out in a crescent shape. He said the ruins were made of massive fitted stones. He speculated that it was an ancient Phoenician city or a remote outpost of a great kingdom. He even brought back a rock that he claimed was a piece of the city's cement. His story caused a stir. A lost city in the Kalahari was an exciting idea. It suggested that a major civilization had existed in a place no one expected. Over the next century, at least 25 expeditions were launched to find Farini's lost city. They searched the desert by foot, by camel, and later by airplane. They found nothing. The search became a kind of obsession for many. A.J. Clement, a professor and amateur archaeologist, spent years researching the story. In the 1960s, he meticulously retraced Farini's likely route. He concluded that Farini had not made the story up. He believed Farini had stumbled upon something real. But what was it? There are several theories. The most likely one is that Farini saw a natural rock formation, and in the heat and haze of the desert, his imagination turned it into a city. The Kalahari is home to many strange geological features, including dolerite rock formations that weather into shapes that can look like walls and buildings. It's easy to see how someone could make that mistake. Another theory is that Farini found real, but much smaller, ruins. There are stone-walled ruins in southern Africa, like those at Great Zimbabwe. It's possibly found a small, previously unknown settlement and exaggerated its size and importance to make his story more impressive. And of course, there's the theory that he just made the whole thing up. Farini was a showman. A lost city was a great story that would sell books and fill lecture halls. It's a simple and cynical explanation, but it can't be ruled out. The legend of the lost city of the Kalahari refuses to die. Even with modern satellite imagery, which has mapped the entire desert, no city has been found. Yet the story persists. It's a classic tale of a lone explorer finding a forgotten wonder. It speaks to the idea that there are still secrets hidden in the empty places of the world. The search for the lost city is not just a search for ruins, it's a search for a different history of Africa. In history, where great civilizations could thrive in the most inhospitable of environments. For now, that history remains lost in the desert sands, perhaps only in the imagination of a 19th century showman. Was Farini an outright liar, or did he genuinely believe he saw a lost city in the desert haze? Could there be a small, significant archaeological site out there that he stumbled upon, which remains undiscovered by modern searchers? Or does the enduring power of his story tell us more about our desire to believe in hidden wonders than it does about the Kalahari Desert itself? Number 7. Was Zerzura an oasis or a mythical paradise? The Sahara Desert is the largest hot desert in the world, a vast sea of sand and rock. But for centuries, travelers have told stories of hidden oases, places of impossible greenness and life in the middle of the desolation. The most famous of these is Zerzura, the oasis of the little birds. The legend of Zerzura appears in old Arabic texts. A 13th century book, the Kitab al-Kunuz, the Book of Treasures, describes a city in the desert. A white city like a dove. It has a gate with a bird carved on it. If you enter, you find sleeping kings and queens and a great treasure. The city is guarded by giant black birds. This early version is clearly a myth, a kind of desert fairy tale. But over time, the story changed. It became less about a mythical city and more about a real undiscovered oasis. Or a group of 3 oases rich in palm trees and fresh water. A place that was incredibly difficult to find, but real. The story was passed down by the people of the desert. They told of a white city deep in the Libyan desert west of the Nile. In the 1920s and 30s, the legend of Zerzura captured the imagination of a group of European explorers. These were men like Ralph Bagnold, who pioneered desert car travel, and the Hungarian Count Laszlo Almasi, the real-life English patient. They were drawn to the romance and the challenge of the empty desert. Zerzura became their holy grail. They called themselves the Zerzura Club. They would meet in bars in Cairo and plan their expeditions. They used cars and airplanes to search the vast, unexplored expanses of the desert. They were looking for a specific geographical feature mentioned in the legends. A valley with palm trees. In 1932, Almasi and his team, flying over the Gilf Kebir Plateau, a remote area of the desert, made an incredible discovery. They found a valley. But it wasn't a green oasis, it was a dry valley with acacia trees. However, they also found prehistoric rock art, paintings of swimmers in the desert. This was the Cave of Swimmers. It proved that this area was once much wetter and supported more life. Later, another expedition led by Patrick Clayton found 2 more similar valleys. Almasi believed he had found the 3 valleys of Zerzura. They were not lush oases anymore. The climate had changed. They were the dried-up remnants of the legendary paradise. He had found the ghosts of Zerzura. The search for Zerzura was a race against time. The clouds of World War II were gathering. These desert explorers, who had once been friends and rivals, soon found themselves on opposite sides of the war. Almasi worked for the Germans. Thagnold founded the British Long-Range Desert Group. The secret knowledge of the desert they had gained while looking for a mythical oasis was now used for military operations. The romance was gone, so was Zerzura real? Yes and no. The mythical white city with sleeping kings was a fantasy. But the idea of a lost oasis was based in reality. The Sahara was not always a desert. Thousands of years ago, it was a savanna. It was full of lakes, rivers, and life. As the climate changed, the desert spread. The people who lived there would have retreated to the shrinking oases. The memory of this wetter, greener past could have been preserved in the legend of Zerzura. The search for Zerzura was one of the last great romantic acts of exploration. A search for a patch of green in a world of brown. A search for a memory of a lost world. Could the original legend of Zerzura have been a garbled account of a real, but now lost, Berber settlement that was abandoned when its water source dried up? Is it possible that a small, undiscovered oasis, fed by a deep underground aquifer, still exists somewhere in the vastness of the Libyan desert? And how many other ancient stories of lost paradises are actually memories of past climate change? Number 6 was Iram of the Pillars destroyed for its sins. In the Quran, the holy book of Islam, there is a story of a great and wicked city. It is called Iram of the Pillars, or Iram of the Lofty Pillars. It was built by a tribe called the Ad in the southern Arabian desert in a place called the Empty Quarter. According to the story, the people of Iram were giants. Their city was magnificent. It had tall buildings and incredible wealth. It was a paradise on earth, but the people were arrogant and corrupt. They forgot God and worshipped idols. God sent a prophet named Hud to warn them. He told them to repent. They laughed at him. So God sent a punishment, a furious, roaring wind that blew for 7 nights and 8 days. The wind destroyed the city and its people. Iram of the Pillars was buried beneath the sands, lost forever as a warning to humanity. For centuries, Iram was considered a myth, a religious parable about the consequences of sin, a kind of Arabian Sodom and Gomorrah. It was a story, not a place, but some people believed it was real. In the tales of the Arabian Nights, Iram is a magical city that can sometimes be found by lost travelers in the desert. The search for a real Iram of the Pillars was long thought to be impossible. The Empty Quarter, or Rub al-Khali, is one of the harshest environments on Earth. It's the largest sand desert in the world. The idea of a great city existing there seemed absurd. But in the 1980s, a documentary filmmaker and amateur archaeologist named Nicholas Clapp became fascinated with the story. He believed he could find Iram. He didn't use old maps or shovels, he used new technology. He went to NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He asked them to use the space shuttle's radar imaging system to look for clues under the sand. This radar could see through the dry sand to the bedrock below. He was looking for old trade routes. Ancient cities were always on trade routes. Iram was famous for its connection to the frankincense trade. The radar images revealed the faint traces of ancient caravan trails long buried by the shifting dunes. And many of these trails converged on a single spot in the desert of modern-day Oman. Clapp organized an expedition. In 1991, they went to the spot indicated by the satellite data. There they found the ruins of a large oasis settlement. They began to excavate. They found the remains of a fortress with high walls and, crucially, the stumps of what were once tall towers or pillars. They found pottery and artifacts from all over the known world, from Rome to India. This was clearly a major trading hub. The dates were right, the location was right, the pillars were there. Clapp and his team announced to the world that they had found Iram of the Pillars. The media called it the Atlantis of the Sands. It was a huge story, a lost city from the Quran, found with space-age technology. But many archaeologists were skeptical. They agreed that the site, known locally as Ubar or Shisar, was an important discovery. It was a significant fortress and trading post that had been lost for centuries. But was it the magnificent, wicked city of Iram described in the Quran? The ruins were impressive for a desert outpost, but they were not a grand city. The name Iram was not found on any inscriptions at the site. The current consensus is that Ubar is likely the place that inspired the legend of Iram. It was a real wealthy trading center in the desert. The Quranic story took this real place and exaggerated its size and splendor to make a religious point. The destruction of Ubar was probably not a divine wind. The excavation showed that the fortress was built over a large limestone cavern. The city's inhabitants drew their water from this underground cave. Eventually, the roof of the cavern collapsed, and a large part of the fortress fell into a sinkhole. This was the real destruction of Ubar. The story of Iram of the Pillars is a fascinating intersection of religion, history, and technology. It shows how a myth can be rooted in a real place and a real event. The search for it shows how new tools can help us uncover the secrets of the past. Is Ubar really Iram? Or is the real Iram, a much larger city, still buried somewhere else under the sands of the empty quarter? Could the story of the destructive wind be a memory of a real, unusually violent sandstorm that helped cause the final collapse of the city? And how many other religious stories and myths are based on real places and events that we have not yet discovered? Number 5 is Atlantis, a memory of a real civilization. Of all the lost cities, one name stands above the rest: Atlantis. It is the ultimate lost world. A story that has fascinated people for over 2,000 years. The story comes from one source and one source only: the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. In 2 of his dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias, written around 360 BCE, he tells the story of Atlantis. He presents it as a true story passed down from an Egyptian priest to the Athenian statesman Solon. According to Plato, Atlantis was a great naval power located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar. It was a huge island, larger than Libya and Asia combined. It was a confederation of kingdoms ruled by wise and noble kings who were descended from the god Poseidon. Their capital city was a marvel of engineering. It was made of concentric rings of land and water, connected by bridges and canals. At its center was a magnificent temple to Poseidon, covered in silver and gold. The people of Atlantis were virtuous and powerful, but over time their divine nature was diluted. They became greedy and corrupt. They launched an invasion to conquer the Mediterranean world. They conquered parts of Europe and Africa, but when they attacked Athens, the small but virtuous Athenian army defeated them. Shortly after their defeat, a terrible cataclysm occurred. In a single day and night of misfortune, there were violent earthquakes and floods. The island of Atlantis sank into the sea and disappeared. For centuries, most people believed Plato's story was what he probably intended it to be: a philosophical fable. As a thought experiment, he used the story of Atlantis to explore themes of power, corruption, and divine justice. The perfect, virtuous ancient Athens was a model for his ideal state. The corrupt, hubristic Atlantis was a warning. But in the 19th century, people started to take the story literally. An American politician and writer named Ignatius Donnelly published a book in 1882 called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. It was a massive bestseller. Donnelly argued that Atlantis was a real place. He claimed it was the source of all ancient civilizations, the pyramids of Egypt, the cultures of the Maya. Everything came from Atlantis. His book sparked the modern obsession with finding the lost continent. Since then, countless people have claimed to know the true location of Atlantis. The theories are all over the map. Some say it was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, on the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Some say it was in the Americas or Antarctica or the North Sea. But the most plausible theory, if you believe Atlantis was based on a real place, connects it to the Minoan civilization. The Minoan civilization flourished on the island of Crete and other Aegean islands from about 2600 to 1100 BCE. They were a sophisticated Bronze Age culture. They had a powerful navy, great art, and magnificent palaces like the one at Knossos. And then around 1600 BCE, a nearby volcanic island called Thera, modern Santorini, erupted. This was one of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history. It caused a massive tsunami that devastated the northern coast of Crete. It sent a huge cloud of ash into the atmosphere, which would have caused climate change and crop failures. The eruption didn't destroy the Minoan civilization overnight, but it was a devastating blow that started its decline. The story of the Minoan catastrophe has many parallels with Plato's story of Atlantis, a powerful island civilization destroyed by a natural disaster. It's possible that the memory of this real event was passed down for over 1,000 years and eventually reached Plato, who used it as the basis for his story. He would have changed the details, exaggerated the size, and moved the location to fit his philosophical narrative. The search for Atlantis continues, but it's not a search for a sunken continent. It's a search for the historical and geological events that might have inspired the world's most enduring legend. And Atlantis is a myth. But it might be a myth with a memory. If Plato's story was based on the Minoan eruption, why did he place Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Hercules? Was he trying to make it sound more exotic and remote, or was he conflating the Minoan story with other tales of lands in the Western Ocean? Could there have been another, smaller Bronze Age catastrophe, perhaps a sunken island in the Mediterranean that we have not yet discovered? And why, after 2,400 years, are we still so desperate to believe that this philosophical fable is a true story? Number 4, does La Ciudad Blanca hold the secrets of a lost culture? Deep in the Mosquitia rainforest of Honduras, one of the most remote and unexplored places in Central America, there is a legend of a lost city. The indigenous people speak of a white house, a place where their ancestors took refuge from the Spanish conquistadors. Over the years, this legend grew. It became the story of La Ciudad Blanca, the White City. A city of immense wealth with giant white stone buildings and a huge statue of a monkey god. The legend attracted explorers and adventurers for decades. In the 1930s, an explorer named Theodore Morde claimed to have found the city. He brought back thousands of artifacts to prove it. He described a great city with a walled pyramid. He promised to return with a full expedition, but he died before he could reveal the location. Many believe he made the whole story up. For the rest of the 20th century, the White City remained a myth. A jungle fantasy, but the rumors persisted. Pilots flying over the region reported seeing what looked like white cliffs or buildings in the dense, unbroken canopy of the jungle. In the 21st century, a new technology changed the search. That technology was LiDAR, or light detection and ranging. It's a system that can be mounted on an airplane. It shoots millions of laser pulses down to the ground. By measuring the time it takes for the pulses to bounce back, it can create a detailed 3D map of the ground, completely stripping away the jungle canopy. In 2012, a team of researchers flew a LiDAR scanner over a remote valley in the Mosquitia. When they processed the data, they were stunned. The images revealed the unmistakable outlines of a large, complex settlement. There were plazas, earthen pyramids, canals, and terraces. It was not just one city. It was a network of settlements, the remains of an entire lost civilization. In 2015, a ground expedition led by archaeologist Chris Fisher went into the valley to confirm the findings. They had to be dropped in by helicopter. The area was so remote and dangerous. It was full of venomous snakes and jaguars. What they found was exactly what the LiDAR had shown them. The ruins were there, completely swallowed by the jungle. The trees were growing out of the tops of the pyramids. At the base of one pyramid, they found a remarkable cache of artifacts. Over 50 beautifully carved stone objects, all left together at the same time. There were ceremonial seats or metates carved with animal figures. And there was a striking sculpture that looked like a jaguar, a half-human, half-jaguar figure. This led to the site being nicknamed the City of the Jaguar. This was not the city from the legends. There were no giant white buildings. It was a city made of earth and wood, now covered in moss. But it was a real lost city, the center of a culture that was completely unknown to archaeologists. They thrived in this valley for centuries, from about 1000 to 1400 CE, and then they vanished. Why did they leave? The artifacts were left behind suddenly, as if the people had to flee. One theory is that they were hit by a devastating epidemic of disease. When Europeans arrived in the New World, they brought diseases like smallpox and measles. These diseases spread faster than the conquistadors themselves. They could have swept through the remote jungle, wiping out up to 90% of the population before a European ever set foot in the valley. The survivors would have fled, and the jungle would have reclaimed the city. The discovery of the City of the Jaguar is rewriting the history of this region. It proves that the Mosquitia jungle was not an empty wilderness. It was home to a complex and sophisticated society. And there are likely many more such cities still hidden under the canopy. What was the name of this culture, and what language did they speak? Why did they build their cities in this remote valley, and who did they trade with? And what other lost civilizations are still waiting to be found, hidden in plain sight under the jungles and forests of the world, just waiting for the right technology to reveal them? Number 3 is Paititi, the final refuge of the Incas. When the Spanish conquistadors destroyed the Inca Empire in the 16th century, they captured an immense treasure of gold and silver. But the story has always been that they didn't get all of it. The legend says that a group of Incas escaped the Spanish. They took with them the sacred golden treasures of their empire, including golden discs, statues, and the entire treasury of the Sun Temple, the Coricancha. They fled deep into the unexplored jungles on the eastern slopes of the Andes into an area called the Antisuyu. There, they founded a new secret city, a final refuge for their people and their culture. They called this city Paititi. The legend of Paititi is a powerful one. It's a story of resistance and survival. It's the promise of a lost world, an Inca city-state that continued to exist, hidden from the outside world for centuries. For hundreds of years, explorers and treasure hunters have searched for it. They have followed old maps, rumors, and the accounts of missionaries who claim to have heard about it from indigenous tribes. The search has focused on a remote region of southeastern Peru and neighboring parts of Bolivia and Brazil. This is the Madre de Dios region, an incredibly dense and difficult jungle. Many have tried to find Paititi, many have failed, some have died in the process. The jungle is a formidable guardian, but are they searching for a ghost? Is Paititi a real place? There are some tantalizing clues. In 2001, an Italian archaeologist named Mario Poglia discovered a document in the Jesuit archives in Rome. It was a report from a missionary named Andres Lopez, written around 1600. Lopez described a large city, rich in gold, silver, and jewels, located in the middle of the tropical jungle. The local people called this city Paititi. This was a stunning piece of evidence. It suggested that, at least in 1600, Paititi was considered a real place by people in the region. Other clues have come from satellite imagery and archaeological fieldwork. Researchers have found Incan roads and small settlements leading from the Andes highlands down into the jungle. This proves that the Incas were active in this region. They were not just a mountain empire. They had a significant presence in the Amazon. In recent years, expeditions have focused on areas like the Panchacola Plateau and the remote jungles around the Magantoni National Sanctuary. They have found new Incan ruins, petroglyphs, and other signs of ancient activity. But they have not yet found a large hidden city. Some researchers believe that Paititi may not be a single city. The word Paititi in the local language might refer to a region or a lordship, a collection of settlements ruled by a single leader. They may be looking for the wrong thing. They are looking for a jungle Machu Picchu, but what they should be looking for is a network of smaller sites. Others believe that Paititi is a purely symbolic place, a myth created by the Incas to give their people hope after the Spanish conquest. A story of a secret kingdom where their culture and religion survived. The story may have been deliberately spread to send the Spanish on a wild goose chase into the jungle, away from the real remnants of the Inca resistance. The search for Paititi is the search for the last chapter of the Inca story. It's a quest to find out what happened to the people who escaped the conquest. Did they build a new life in the jungle? Did they preserve their knowledge and their treasures? Or did they slowly succumb to disease and the hardships of their new environment? The jungle holds the answer. Could a city the size of Paititi remain completely hidden in the 21st century, even from satellites? If the Incas did take a vast golden treasure with them, where is it now? And if explorers were to finally find Paititi, should its location be revealed to the world? Or should it be left in peace? A final secret of the Inca people. Number 2. Did Colonel Fawcett find the lost city of Z? In 1925, a British explorer named Colonel Percy Harrison Fawcett walked into the Brazilian jungle and was never seen again. He was searching for a lost city, a city he called Us. His disappearance became one of the greatest exploration mysteries of the 20th century. Fawcett was a remarkable figure. A former army officer, he was tough, experienced, and deeply mystical. He had spent years mapping the remote border regions of South America for the Royal Geographical Society. During his travels, he became obsessed with the idea of a lost civilization in the Amazon. He believed that a highly advanced ancient society had once existed in the jungle. His belief was fueled by several things. He saw strange earthworks and pottery shards in areas that were thought to be uninhabited. He also found a document in the National Library of Rio de Janeiro. It was called Manuscript 512. It was a crumbling Portuguese text from the 18th century. It told the story of a group of explorers who, in 1753, had found the ruins of a great stone city in the interior of Brazil. The manuscript described a city with arches, a temple, and statues. This document became Fawcett's blueprint. It convinced him that his lost city, Z, was real. In 1925, he set off on his final expedition. He was accompanied by his son, Jack, and Jack's friend, Raleigh Rimmel. Fawcett was secretive about his exact route. He didn't want anyone to follow him and steal his discovery. He sent back dispatches for a few months. The last one was sent on May 29th, 1925. He wrote that he was about to enter unexplored territory. After that, there was only silence. The disappearance of the Fawcett expedition caused a global sensation. Dozens of rescue missions were launched. Over 100 people died trying to find him. They found rumors and conflicting stories from indigenous tribes. Some said Fawcett and his companions had been killed. Others said Fawcett had gone native and become the chief of a tribe. Some even claimed he had found the city of Z and was living there, choosing not to return. No conclusive evidence was ever found. His fate remains a mystery. For decades, the mainstream archaeological view was that Fawcett was chasing a fantasy. The Amazon soil was thought to be too poor to support the large-scale agriculture needed for a city. The idea of a complex civilization in the jungle was dismissed, but recent discoveries are forcing a major reevaluation. Deforestation and new technologies like satellite imagery and LiDAR have revealed something extraordinary. In the Upper Xingu region of Brazil, exactly where Fawcett was searching, archaeologists have found the remains of a vast network of ancient settlements. These are not stone cities. They are urban landscapes made of earth. They are known as the Kuhikugu culture. This civilization existed from about 500 to 1600 CE. It consisted of a series of towns and villages connected by wide roads. They were surrounded by moats and defensive walls. They had plazas, bridges, and causeways. They managed the landscape, building ponds for fish farming and planting large orchards. It was a complex, sophisticated society that supported a large population. And then it was wiped out, likely by European diseases that swept through the region, killing up to 95% of the people. By the time Europeans explored the area centuries later, the jungle had grown back. The civilization was forgotten. Did Fawcett know about these settlements? Did he find one of them? The archaeologist Michael Heckenberger, who has worked on the Kuhikugu sites, believes it's possible Fawcett was in the right area. He may have been the first European to see the last remnants of this lost civilization. He may have seen the large earthworks and, in his mind, connected them to the stone city of manuscript 512. He may have found Z, but it wasn't the city he was expecting. The story of Percy Fawcett and the lost city of Z is a story about the line between obsession and vision. He was dismissed as a crank for decades, but it turns out his core belief was right. The Amazon was not an empty wilderness, it was the home of a lost civilization. He just had the details wrong. What really happened to Fawcett and his companions? Were they killed by a tribe that saw them as a threat, or did they simply succumb to disease or starvation in the unforgiving jungle? If he did find the Kuhikugu settlements, did he realize the significance of what he was seeing? And how many more lost civilizations are still hidden beneath the Amazon rainforest? Their stories waiting to be rediscovered. Number 1, will we ever find El Dorado? It is the most famous lost city of all. The very name is synonymous with unimaginable wealth. El Dorado, the Golden City. For nearly 500 years, its legend has lured explorers, conquerors, and treasure hunters to their doom. The story of El Dorado did not start with a city. It started with a man, the Gilded Man. In the 1530s, the Spanish conquistadors in the Andes of Colombia heard a story from the local Muisca people. It was a story about a ritual. When a new Muisca king was crowned, he would cover his body in gold dust. He would then be taken to the middle of a sacred lake, Lake Guatavita. He would offer gold and emeralds to the gods by throwing them into the water. Then he would wash the gold dust from his body into the lake. The Spanish were electrified by this story. They had already found vast riches in the Aztec and Inca empires. But this was something else. A king who covered himself in gold. A lake filled with treasure. They had to find it. They started calling the King El Dorado the Gilded Man. Over time, the legend changed. The story of the Golden Man became the story of a golden city. The focus shifted from the ritual to the place where the Golden King lived. Where El Dorado became a mythical kingdom, a city with golden streets and golden temples hidden somewhere in the vast, unexplored interior of South America. This new legend launched some of the most ambitious and disastrous expeditions in history. Men like Gonzalo Pizarro and Francisco de Orellana led armies into the Amazon jungle. They were searching for El Dorado. They found only starvation, disease, and death. The English adventurer Sir Walter Raleigh became obsessed with the legend. He made 2 trips to South America to find it. He wrote a book about the large, rich, and beautiful empire of Guyana, convincing many in Europe that the city was real. He failed to find it and was eventually executed. The search for El Dorado was a fever. It drove men to acts of incredible bravery and horrific cruelty. Thousands of Europeans and tens of thousands of indigenous people died in the quest. The legend acted like a mirage, always pulling the explorers deeper into the unknown, just over the next mountain range, just around the next bend in the river. So, was any of it real? The original story, the one about the Gilded Man, was true. The Muisca people did perform a ceremony like this at Lake Guatavita. The Spanish tried to drain the lake several times to get the treasure. They found some gold, but not the vast hoard they were expecting. The ritual had stopped long before the Spanish arrived. But the Golden City, that was never real. It was a myth, a fabrication. It was likely a story that the indigenous people told the Spanish to get them to leave. They would point into the jungle and say, "The gold is over there," just to get the violent and greedy Europeans to move on. And the Spanish, blinded by their lust for gold, believed them every time. The search for El Dorado was the ultimate wild goose chase. It was a symbol of the destructive power of greed. It opened up vast areas of the South American continent to European exploration, but at a terrible cost. And yet, the idea of El Dorado has never completely died. Even today, there are people who believe that a lost city of gold is still hidden somewhere in the jungles of Colombia, Venezuela, or Brazil. The legend is too powerful, too seductive to let go. El Dorado is not a place you can find on a map. It's a place in the human mind. It represents the ultimate prize, the thing that is always just out of reach. It is the dream of finding a paradise on earth, a place where all our desires can be fulfilled. And as long as we have that dream, we will probably never stop searching for El Dorado. How much of the Muisca gold is still at the bottom of Lake Guatavita beyond the reach of modern technology? Did the indigenous tribes invent the story of a golden city from scratch, or were they describing a real but more modest trading center that they knew the Spanish would never find? And what is the next El Dorado, the next great myth that will drive us to explore the last unknown corners of our world, or perhaps even other worlds?